right, thanks so much for sharing your garden. And right now we're going to be joined by Anne McCormick, who is the author of The Homegrown Herb Garden and a writer for the Dallas Morning News. Thanks for trekking down to Austin today.
Well, you're welcome. It was an adventure getting down here, but we're glad to be here in Austin.
We're going to lead our audience on an adventure right now.
Well, yes, that's true. Anytime you talk about herbs, you're going to go on a trek. Yes.
Well, and it's one of the things, when we were talking about herbs before we started here, you were talking about the intrigue of herbs. Is that what got you hooked?
Oh, I think to some extent. People think of herbs as just something maybe they pick and add a little bit to the dinner casserole, and that's certainly true and very much a part of our lives. But each one of them has a history, and sometimes those histories are quite colorful. You would be surprised. And the herbs and spices that come from faraway places, some of them, it's just fascinating, the tales that can be told.
Oh, and spices and herbs have motivated people to travel all the way across the globe.
Yes, actually, the discovery of America and the discovery of many navigational tools were spurred by the cost of spices and how much they cost when they arrived in Europe from the Far East.
Well, you know, our ancestors probably have been using herbs medicinally and for culinary purposes for tens of thousands of years.
Oh, as far back as civilization. The earliest records of civilization do indicate the ancient Egyptians used many of them. They established many of the trade routes to the Far East as such. And as you mentioned sort of in passing, but all spices and just about virtually all of the herbs that we know had not only the culinary but also the medicinal use. Not everyone's aware, for instance, that cinnamon is antiseptic and was used as late as World War I in medicine in the Far East. It still is today in folk medicine, Chinese folk medicine. I once had a Chinese coworker, and I had a cup of tea with very strong cinnamon, and he commented on the smell, and clearly he didn't like it, and I was surprised. And he confessed to me that as a child, his mother had given him a cinnamon tea when he was sick, and so he associated it with being sick. So, you know, that's just a little glimpse into the little bits of history that all herbs and spices do have.
Well, and let's go down to the roots a little bit here of these plants. And there's kind of a breaking point in the history of man's use, and it's, at least in the European sense of it, is that there's pre-chili and post-chili.
Yes, very much so, because the chili peppers that were discovered in the New World had a profound effect on culture, on cuisine all across the world. I mean, Szechuan, what we know, Szechuan Chinese cooking is based on the heat from the chili pepper that came from the New World. But prior to that, there were other things that were used to provide heat in food. I mean, people in the 14th century, before Columbus discovered America, wanted to have good tasting food just as much as we do. And so
they probably lacked what we do.
They did. And actually, the spices that we mentioned that spurred the trade to the Far East were expensive and were largely consumed by the upper class in foods, but they were also used as incense in the churches. Incense was a part of the worship and was considered a way of symbolizing the prayers of the saints going up to God. It has a very strong spiritual connection there. But black pepper and some of its close neighbors, botanically speaking, were used for that pepper. For that strong pepper flavor. But one of them that we still grow today was also used for heat was winter savory. We think of that as an herb like oregano and thyme, but it has definitely a peppery overtone to it.
A lot of herbs actually do, and you say that.
Yes, and in the appropriate combinations can provide a certain amount of heat and flavor. And since winter savory could easily be grown in Europe, unlike cinnamon or cloves, it was something that could be used by the middle and lower classes because they could grow it themselves, not rely on merchants for it.
Okay, well, let's explore some of the other herbs that are on your favorite list here in terms of stories. Rosemary is certainly one of my favorites. I love to cook with it.
That was one that astonished me when I took a look at its history and discovered how it had like some other herbs, also gone in and out of fashion. As I was looking, my initial, when I was digging into the history of herbs and spices, I initially was focusing on the American scene, and from the time of the first settlers to currently. And I was looking at some 19th century books, which cookbooks in those times, in the early 19th century, were actually a combination more we would call general housekeeping, because it would tell you how to cook, but it would have some discussion about cooking, how to make shoe polish, how to treat the servants,
Right.
all sorts of things in there. And I found one book, for instance, that had a list of herbs to grow, and there was a list of culinary herbs, and there was a list of medicinal herbs. Rosemary was definitely on the medicinal side of things.
Interesting.
Rosemary is a very strong.
Oh, yes.
It's very strong, and if used too much, has almost an antiseptic. Some of the chemicals in rosemary are identical to those in pine needles. Actually, this one has that piney scent, and so it was used more historically in medicinal areas. In fact, the first American cookbook has some rather negative things to say about rosemary and garlic, as I recall.
Oh,
Those,
no, not
Oh, yes.
saying bad things about garlic.
Oh, believe me. Garlic is one that has really gone in. Garlic and onions were regarded as seasoning for the lower class.
Oh.
And the first American cookbook, which was 1787 by Amelia Simmons, she says garlic is only used by the French. And it was clear her opinion in that situation. But even as late as the 20th century, it was regarded as low class. I read a brief discussion from a social worker in New York City dealing with immigrants from Italy, Spain, France, etc. And they were talking about an immigrant family, because they were trying, in those days, what they focused on was assimilation. And she said, her comment was, "Not yet assimilated, still eating garlic." So that's just an example of how
That's good.
herbs, spices have gone in and out of favor.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's real briefly talk about another one. Basil is a favorite nowadays.
Oh, people love to grow basil, very definitely.
Yeah.
The king of herbs in many ways. There are a number of basil species. Most of them are the Ocimum basilicum, the main one. And that is very heavily used, of course, in French cooking, a lot of
Italian
Italian
cooking, sure.
very much. Now in Italian, it also has, for instance, a symbolic association. There's two reasons why in the peninsula of Italy they would have it in the window. One of the things they used is actually basil leaves can repel flies. You actually, if you crush the leaves slightly, what they would do is crush it slightly and hang it in the window. This is before screens were common, and that would help repel the flies.
Interesting.
But the other thing that it was sometimes used is a pot of basil. Fresh pot of basil in the window was a symbol to the whole world that home had a lady of marriageable age in it.
Oh, okay.
And suitors,
Heads up.
suitors were appreciated.
Okay. Well, the book is filled not just with these wonderful anecdotes and history, but lots of recipes and
Yes, it
practical
is.
advice about how to garden with these plants.
Yes, I co-authored this with a French-trained chef, Lisa Baker Morgan. The first half of the book is my writing on how to grow. There's 15 herbs that can be grown any place in North America, the U.S. and Canada. And my co-author chef, then in the second half of the book, has some wonderful recipes in there.
Let me tell you, just looking at the book gets your mouth to watering.
Oh,
So-
yes. Be a steak with chimichurri sauce, which is a South American sauce. Mojitos are in there.
Okay.
All sorts of things. You will enjoy the food.
Now, real briefly, where can people find you online?
I am online at www.herb-and-cowgirl.com.
Herb and Cowgirl,
I'm
huh?
Ann McCormick, the Herb and Cowgirl, yes.
Well, Ann, it has been a genuine pleasure taking a ride with the Herb
you.
and Cowgirl today. I can see that you're a real pistol. You got a
Well,
lot of
thank
information.
you.
A lot of information, a lot of passion for the subject. It's
love it.
always great to see.
Okay.
All right, coming up next is our friend Daphne.